Hey everyone, it's Chase Elleby and Joel Williams from Williams Elleby, and today we're going to talk to you about what actually makes something a lawsuit. We've done a lot of videos on kind of the specifics of lawsuits and things like that, but we're just going to talk about what actually makes something a lawsuit. And the first thing I sort of think of when explaining a lawsuit is you're basically either asking or trying to make someone do something, or a company do something, or stopping someone from doing something. So that's kind of the simplest way to kind of explain a lawsuit. But Joel, why don't you elaborate?
Yeah, so I went back and looked, and we've got a little bit of feedback about, man, you guys are like way down in the weeds, and I'd take a step back and let's start from step number one.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're trying to do today. But sometimes there's a little bit of confusion over exactly what a lawsuit is. And some people think that a lawsuit is as soon as you make a claim against somebody else, or if you're asking them for money, or if you're asking for a divorce or whatever. And to some extent that's true, but a lawsuit is not a lawsuit. A claim is not a lawsuit until formal litigation has been filed. So in other words, once you or your attorney file documents in court asking, like Chase was saying, for somebody else to either do something or not do something or pay money, it's usually called a complaint that's filed in court, then that begins a lawsuit. Prior to something being filed formally in court, what you would have is a claim or a dispute or something of that nature. And usually lawsuits are only filed if the parties, the people that have this dispute, can't informally resolve their differences prior to having to go into the lawsuit stage or formal litigation.
Right. It's very, very rare that you're in a situation where the first thing you ever do is file a lawsuit right away. There's always some communication, whether it's phone call, letter, what have you, where you're trying to resolve some sort of dispute. And then if you can't get it resolved, like Joel said, you go ahead and you file that lawsuit. Now, you probably always hear, like in the news and things like that, like this person filed a lawsuit and did this, that, and the other, and you're thinking, oh, that's crazy. Like, why in the world would you file a lawsuit for that? Well, let me just tell you, you can literally file a lawsuit for any reason you want. Doesn't mean you're going to win. You could probably end up paying fees, but there's nothing stopping anyone from literally going down to court, filing a lawsuit, suing, UFOs for flying, with aliens in it. There's literally nothing stopping anyone from doing that, other than the court kicking you out and having you pay fees. So Just think, when you see an article and you think it's like, that's crazy, someone filed a lawsuit, it's probably somebody doing it themselves without a lawyer involved. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and other than suing UFOs, like realistic things that people would file lawsuits for may be injuries, breach of contract, divorce, defamation, anything and everything in between you can file a lawsuit for, as long as there's a cause of action that the law allows you to bring. Because like Chase said, filing a lawsuit and succeeding in a lawsuit are two completely different things. So when you're looking at, and I'll just use personal injury as an example because that's what we do. Typically, that lawsuit's not filed until after we have exhausted every reasonable option to try to get the case or the claim settled for whatever monetary amount we feel is fair for that case with the at-fault person's insurance company.
Correct.
And whether we have to file a lawsuit is usually dependent on whether the insurance company for the other side will agree to what's fair. And it's similar in like a divorce situation. Even though we don't handle divorce, if somebody goes to their spouse and says, hey, look, this has got to end, I want a divorce. If those two people can sit down and determine, all right, child support, alimony, who gets what, then a lawsuit will never be filed. But if there's a disagreement or a point of friction where they can't reach agreement on something, then you get to the point where it's highly likely that formal litigation or a lawsuit will be filed.
And one example obviously being if you've tried to resolve the dispute and you can't. But another example of when you actually need to file a lawsuit is if you're coming up on the statute of limitations, right? So like we do personal injury. So personal injury in Georgia, for instance, most of the time as a general rule, you've got 2 years from the date of the incident to file a lawsuit. Well, I've got some clients that are still treating past 2 years, and I can't really negotiate or do anything because I don't know what the extent of the damages are. So in that case, you need to go ahead and just file a lawsuit. So That doesn't happen all the time, but just because a dispute or just because you filed a lawsuit doesn't mean you can't get that case resolved after you filed a lawsuit, before or after the fact. So
yeah, and sometimes lawsuits are necessary to get cases resolved, even if the parties have reached an agreement. You had a real good example of a minor's case that you reached a settlement agreement on.
Right, yeah, reached a settlement agreement, then you just filed a lawsuit to get court approval for the minor. So so sometimes the lawsuit's just kind of every time it's a means to an end, but sometimes it's a quicker means to an end. And in that situation where it's a minor settlement, it's much easier for the state court judge to approve that settlement as opposed to going through the probate side, which takes a lot longer. So you'll file a lawsuit in that situation as well.
And so sometimes lawsuits aren't done. Well, they're usually not done out of vindictiveness, although sometimes they are. They're usually filed because there just can't be an agreement reached. But in that specific situation, an agreement was reached, but because it was a minor in Georgia, the law requires court approval. So the easiest way to get that done is just file the lawsuit. The other side knows it was going to happen, and then you put it before the judge so they can approve it or not approve it. We talked about when lawsuits are filed. So what about when a lawsuit is filed? Like, who decides what happens in the lawsuit as far as resolution goes?
Yeah, so it depends, right? Generally, it's a jury. Like for what we do, for injury cases, it's almost always going to be a jury. It's either 6-person or 12-person. Most of the time, it's going to be a 12-person jury. Same with criminal cases. They're almost always going to be jury trials. Rarely, I don't even know if you can have a bench trial in a criminal matter. But on the civil side, you can have a bench trial, which is the judge is basically deciding what the matter is going to be. Parties can consent to having a bench trial. There's, let's say you can agree on most everything, but you can't quite figure out what the damages are going to be. Well, let's have a judge decide instead of having a jury decide. And then, you can get into the administrative law side of things, which we won't really touch on now, but those are also judges involved. It's kind of court, but it's not like the court that we usually are filing into. But that's another, I guess, decider or arbiter of a decision.
Yeah, I think long story short, just remember that something becomes a lawsuit once it's filed in court, right? Once a judge or jury has the case or the claim, your lawyer or either you have filed formal papers to get everything started, that's when it's considered a lawsuit. Prior to that point, it's a claim or a dispute or something like that. But you got anything else on what is a lawsuit or when does something become a lawsuit?
No, I think we definitely covered, sort of the basics of it. And you can look back at our other videos where we get more into the weeds, as Joel said, on specifics, things like what happens once you're in a lawsuit, service of the lawsuit, and things like that. But I think generally speaking, we pretty much hit the highlights on what actually is a lawsuit.
Well, we appreciate you spending some time with us today. If this video has been helpful, please give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we will see you next week for another video.